So a couple years ago, we did the research called Better Together, and out of that came the Hopeful Neighborhood Project. And it was trying to rally Christians right where they live to see what is good, what is strong, and see what they can do to pursue common good right where they live. And as we did that, though, one of the things that we learned that in asset-based development, community development, often we'll look around our neighborhood and we'll be like, oh, we got a park there, or we have a library, or we have, this neighborhood association. But one of the other things that we consider is the gifts of the people, right? So when we look around our neighborhood and we say, there's Dick, and he is just really good at finances. Like, he just gets numbers, right? Ooh, sorry. And we look at Lou and we're like, man, Lou is so good at communication. Like, he is ready to tell people what's going on. He's got great communication skills. And we look at all the different people of our community and we see what gifts God has given them. And so we really took the opportunity to dig even deeper into giftedness and see just what we can learn about the gifts of God's people and the gifts that God gives to his people. So it's really interesting to follow President Gibson and Dominic as they talked about the gifts that God has given to his church, right? I feel like I need your presentation, President Gibson, because it was like, wow, he talks better about LHM than I do, giving the history, right, of just our past and how lay people, everyday Christian followers, followers of Jesus, use their gifts to support the church and to expand the church and to further God's kingdom. And so when we do these research projects, it's a lot about research, it's a lot about what we think, how we can help the church grow or learn, but we like to start in God's word. And this is a fascinating story. It's a little hard to read, and probably, I'm not going to say, there's a couple of hard names in here, so I won't read it all out loud for you. But in Exodus 35, we've gotten through, Moses has gone up, he has gotten the 10 Commandments, then the golden calf happens, and he breaks it, and then he goes back and he gets the second set. So he's got the commandments, and God has given Moses all these instructions for how to set up the tabernacle and how to set up worship now as they live in the wilderness. And here Moses says to the people of Israel, see, the Lord has called by name, Bezalel, that sounds great, son of Uri, son of Hur, from the tribe of Judah. And he has filled him with the Spirit of God, with skill, with intelligence, with knowledge, and with all craftsmanship, to devise artistic design, to work in gold and silver and bronze, in cutting stones for setting, in carving wood for work in every skilled craft. And he has inspired him, so God has inspired him to teach both him and Oholiab, thank you. Let's see, a son of, like I said, tribe of Dan. And he has filled them with skill to do every sort of work done by an engraver or by a designer or by an embroiderer in blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen, or by a weaver, by any sort of workman or skilled designer. So Bezalel and Oholiab, and every craftsman in whom God has put the skill and intelligence to know how to do any work in the construction of the sanctuary shall work in accordance with all that the Lord has commanded. And Moses called Bezalel and Oholiab and every craftsman in whose mind the Lord has put skill, everyone whose heart stirred him up to come and to do the work. The reason why I love this story is because at Lutheran Ministries, right, we work with lay people, right? We work with everyday followers of Jesus, right? And so often when we hear stories, we meet people, well, I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a pastor. I'm not but I love this story. And when we started digging into the gifts of God's people, this was really impactful for us because God there gave and inspired him with very, not just craftsman skills, artistic skills, but very intentional skills for building the tabernacle and the things that they needed to set up their place of worship. And I think that that's really important for us, that God gives us all gifts, right? I think that's really helpful for us to remember. And here in James, we see, "Do not be deceived, my beloved brothers, for every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights." We're reminded that God is the giver of each of those gifts. And as we started thinking about how we wanted to talk about gifts, we use the word gifts because we believe that they are actually given to us by God, right? But we're talking about the skills and abilities, the everyday creaturely gifts, if you will, that God has given to each and one of his creation. And this one you're probably very familiar with from Ephesians 2. "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, it is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast. For we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which he prepared beforehand that we should walk in them." And again, this is this idea that God has given us the gifts and given things set out for us to do before we even know them, right? That he has created in us a desire to be really good at numbers, or be really good at art, or have really good personal skills, or whatever it may be, that has been created and given to us for work that we are not even aware of yet, right? That God has created that in us. And so we truly believe that you, me, that we are all gifts from God with gifts to share. Now, the interesting thing about this is we started this research a couple of years ago, and Tony Cook, Dick mentioned him, he's our chief mission officer at LHM, and one of my bosses, but this idea that we are all gifts from God with gifts to share, not just me, but you, but each of us. I was thinking about this as Dominic was speaking, because it's so easy to look at the other and say, he was talking about the drivers on the 405, right? If we can remember that each person is a beloved child of God, if each person is indeed a gift from God with gifts to share with the world, how greatly would that change the way we interact with one another? Whether there are so many topics today that are this or that, right? Whether your favorite color is blue or red, or whatever hot topic, current cultural thing, it's one side or the other, right? But it was fascinating to me when Tony first started talking about this, is that, thinking about even contentious election season, right? If I could look at the presidential candidate that I didn't vote for and say, that person is a gift from God with gifts to share. If the person who doesn't vote like me, or the person who doesn't see eye to eye with me about a particular topic, or if the neighbor across the street that just won't mow their lawn, if I can see that person as a gift from God with gifts to share, wouldn't that change just the ways that we interact with people? Not just at home, but at work, at school, at church, in our neighborhoods, and in our societies. And what is unique to our Lutheran heritage is this idea of vocation. Familiar with that word, vocation, right? So this idea that God has given us each these gifts, but that we actually can use them in different roles and relationships in our life. And so the gifts that God has given uniquely to you can actually be used not just with your kids, or not just in your workplace, but they might also be given as gifts to the community at large, or to the church. I'm sorry, your name is Lynn? Linda, thank you. Hearing the example of Linda and the gifts of art, not only was she using her artistic gifts for the gifts of her students, for the gifts of her church, for the gifts of the community at large, as she helped design stained glass windows that were seen on TV and at the parade to millions of people, right? What an amazing way to use our gifts at home, at our jobs, at our neighborhoods. And as Lutherans, we get that idea of vocation, but so many people really struggle for like their purpose in the world. And when we talk, especially to younger people, and they're trying to find their way, they're trying to think why they're here, why they belong, this is something that we can actually say, like, you are a gift from God with gifts to share. And maybe not even in the church right now, but maybe just you have this gift of mechanics, and how can you use that for the common good of those around you? Just in your family, but maybe in your neighborhood and in your community. So, talk a little bit about the research. When we were able to ask folks kind of how they thought about their gifts. So when we say gifts, we're talking about the skills and abilities that we feel like are innate to them. So not saying that you can't grow them, but just things that you're kind of like more, what's the word I'm looking for? More natural to you, okay? So as we started interviewing people and surveying folks all around the US and different ages, different locations, different ethnicities, gender, backgrounds, all that kind of stuff. So that all plays into a factor when we do these surveys. But about half of practicing Christians, so you see 54%, say they know and they understand their gifts very well. So they've got a good idea of what they're good at, what gifts they've been given. And then it's a funnel idea, right? So then kind of from there, about 38% say they're intentional, we call it intentional with their gifts. So they know that they're aware of what gifts they think they're good at, but they also know that there's things that they want to develop and that they're already kind of looking for ways to grow those gifts. And then the kind of smallest segment there, at 27%, are the folks that are actually generous with their gifts. So they've taken their gifts that they have and they're sharing them with others, and they feel like that they can actually benefit others with the gifts that they've been given, okay? So when Four out of five people say that they have gifts, talents, or abilities that they're interested in developing further. And so that's kind of a great place to think about as we talk about gifts, and what we can do is when we gather people, finding out ways to gather people around in communities, looking for ways to do mission starts and things like that. What are the things that interest people? If there are people who are in Linda, sorry, I'm going to keep using you as my example because it's such a great one. But if she knows there are people in her community that are looking to grow their art skills, for instance, she's teaching at a community college and she's using her art skills to teach others who are also interested in developing their art skills. So what does it look like for us to consider our communities, our churches, our neighborhoods? What gifts has God given us? And what are people looking to grow? But what also, the people in the community, what are they looking to share? How do they want to be generous with their gifts? The other thing that we thought was really interesting is that 1 in 3 U.S. adults, and even more, 2 in 5 practicing Christians, say they have gifts that they definitely want to develop. So, when they think about whether it's finances or communication or interpersonal skills or cross-cultural skills, like there are things that people realize in themselves that they want to learn, they want to grow better at, and there are people in our communities that have those skills that want to connect. So what does that mean for our churches? When we were surveying folks, over half said that they actually see the church as a desirable place for them to grow those skills, to grow those gifts. And interestingly enough, as President Gibson was saying, half say that their skills are most often recognized at church. So interesting too that we can use church as a place to see the gifts in each other, right? The temptation for those of us who work in the church is to see those, so that how do those gifts of everyone benefit our church community? So we have to see past that to be able to see how can our gifts support our church, but also how can our gifts support our families, support our neighborhoods, support our greater communities. One of the things, though, that when we did survey pastors and church leaders, very few say that they have structure around the effort of growing gifts or speaking or talking about gifts outside of just volunteering. So again, it's a huge temptation for us, and I get it, because when my husband, as a pastor, he'll say, we really need more Sunday school teachers. And so we go looking for volunteers through the lens of those gaps. But what's fascinating when we convince churches to think about, again, starting with what's strong and what's present in a congregation, it starts an interesting conversation. There was a congregation in the St. Louis area where we used to live, and it was even before all this research came out, but they were talking one day, and the church had, I want to say 7 or 8 mechanics in the congregation. Some of them were just hobbyists. Some of them, 1 or 2 guys had their own garages or worked full time, as mechanics. And then some were just, hobbyists or worked on their old cars. But it started this conversation what does it mean that there are so many mechanics, so many mechanically minded folks in our congregation? Once a year, they do this day where they invite families from the community. Specifically, they had a real heart for single moms, but they invited families from the community to come, and they were doing oil changes and just checking up on people's cars. Now, obviously, they couldn't fix everything in the moment, right? But it was a way for them to support their community and say, come and your car's making a funny noise, come, let us at least look at it, try to get you pointed in the right direction, or tell you what you need to go and get the help that you needed. Or if a congregation has a bunch of lawyers in its midst, what is God saying? What does God want you to care about? Because a lot of people are civic minded, so it's an interesting exercise to see what your congregation, what God is calling you based on the gifts of the people in your congregation. So, with all of our research, Lutheran Our Ministries takes the research, talks to people, and we try to make as many resources and things that you can take and use in your congregations, whether it be your pastors or as small group leaders, things you can take back and share with those in your community. And one of the things that we did, and this is more that a church could kind of do as a whole thing, but it's the church campaign. And inside it is a multitude of resources, but it includes not only a 5-week sermon series, but also small group Bible studies for you to do, whether it be in Bible class hour or in small groups throughout your congregation. But one of the cool things that we made, it's all cool, but one of the things I really like that we made is this 4-week Path to Purpose curriculum. And one of the things that we found is that it's a really good starting place, Christian or non-Christian. We ask about our purpose. Why am I here? What am I doing? What is life about? And with many people who maybe because they're retired and they're trying to figure out what am I going to do in my retirement, or maybe they're on the younger end and they're just trying to figure out what's next, what's job. A lot of young people want, they have this ideal that my job is going to be super fulfilling, and they're trying to make sure that they have purpose and work in the same breath, and they're trying to see what all is available. But this study it's not a Bible study. So it's something that you can use in your community. You can invite anyone. There is a little bit of just kind of, we are a Christian, we're coming through this lens of we believe that God has created each of us with gifts. But outside of that, it's just helping people process the gifts that they've been given and how they can share that and use that in community. So we wanted to create a resource that churches could use in their neighborhoods, invite just everyday folks, whether Christian or not, people that are seeking or just kind of interested, but they can come and have these conversations about purpose and about the gifts that they have, and how they might benefit not just their workplace, because that's often where I'm good at communication, so I'm going to work in marketing or something like that. Well, I'm good at communication. Maybe that changes the way I interact with my family, might change the way I interact in society, or the ways that I help at my kids' school, or I'm involved in my neighborhood, or all these sorts of things. And so this Path to Purpose, this 4-week curriculum, just encourages you to invite people to watch a video, to have a meal, and have some of these just really honest conversations about what to do with the gifts that you've been given, those skills and abilities. And the best part is that it allows you to combine people with the gifts that they want to grow with the people that have those gifts, right? So you're putting people in the same room. And so if someone's like, I am not good with numbers. I am not good with finances. I know my family would really benefit from having a better budget. And then you've got someone sitting at the same table that's like, oh no, that's my full-time job. I'm really good at that. Getting people in those spaces to have those conversations allows for connection. Again, those ideas of hearing all the conversations before my presentation right now, I'm thinking oh yeah, what would it mean if you had a ton of money, finance, numbers people? You could offer a financial training class at your church to open it to the community. Just thinking differently about the gifts that are present in your midst. The church campaign comes with a bunch of other resources that allows with all the research if you're a data person. And then it comes with the book we call a research report, which is Barna's, just their analysis of all the data. And then it comes with just all the promotional things that a church would need if they wanted to do a big sermon series or a church campaign about Gifted for More. But some of the other things, and I saw Lou and Dick, they have it on the back table, so we brought some extras, so grab one. But a couple of things that just for you, if this interests you, I'd encourage you to grab. Don Everts, he's written a number of books for us based on our research. So this is LHM's take on this research. You can grab those, but the Discover Your Gifts workbook, it walks through what we have 12 different areas of giftedness, and it just helps people see those gifts in themselves, but really helps us look at it vocationally and allows you to consider I'm a pretty good leader, but what would that mean for me in my family or in my church or in my neighborhood? And it helps just a process of self-reflection and being able to talk about that with other people, seeing the gifts that you have and how God might be calling you to use them in the different areas of your life. And then lastly, one of the kind of the big takeaways for us at LHM was we wanted to create an assessment that helped people do that on the spot. And so we created the Every Gift Inventory, and you can actually go online and you can share this with folks from your congregation, but you can it's not a short quiz, I will say, because it's got some personal reflection, so you have to take the time to answer the questions. But it walks you through scenarios around these 12 gifting areas, and it allows you to think about when have I used these? Have people asked me to share? I think I have good financial skills. And so it will say, well, how have you used those, and what have you done? Have you shared those before? If people ask you to teach about those, and so it walks you through for the different gifted areas, and then it gives you a report. And as part of the church campaign, it will also allow your church to do it too, which is an interesting just piece for pastors. Is you're trying to say like, well, what could God be calling our congregation to? What are the gifts of our congregation? We can set you up so that you could do that as a church and get that full report and be like, oh, did I know that we had that many lawyers or that many civic-minded people in our midst, or that many people, thinking about with cross-cultural skills, how vital that is in some of these larger the 6 metro areas where there are 36 million people, right? And all of a sudden you see, oh my gosh, our congregation has so many just cross-culturally minded folks. Like, what does that mean for our congregation? So just another resource for you. And again, because of the generous support of Lutheran laymen all over the U.S. and all over the globe, so many of these resources are free to you. Or they're small, we call them convenience fees, right? So many of our resources you can find online, they're free. But like if you need a DVD, you might have to order that from the storefront. But Lou and Dick and everyone, they've got all these sorts of things that you can check out on the back table. We can connect you with those resources for your congregations. And I'd love to just chat more about them over lunch as we go to lunch soon. But the idea that we are all a gift, that God has gifted each one of us, it's really impactful. It really is life-changing. And when we can see our neighbor, when we can see a coworker, when we can see a family member as a gift from God with gifts to share, it is life-changing. It is sharing the love of Christ, and it allows us to build those relationships with people. And it's in relationship that we're able to share the good news of Jesus Christ. And so, love to talk to you about any of our resources at LHM, but in particular, Gifted for More. So thanks so much for having me today.